The reckoning has come. It's not an exaggeration to say that what's happening right now over at Bungie is enough to tank the studio. And for those of you in the loop, it has been the talk of the town since it happened that Marathon, a game that was already not receiving the most positive feedback from people, we could even say quite negative feedback to the point that pretty severe revisions and changes needed to be made to the game before it was actually coming out, had been using stolen art from independent artists. And not just the fact that there was directly stolen art in the game as admitted by Bungie themselves, but the entire artistic vision and direction of the game, as well as what other stolen things could be in it, are now all in question. And considering that, at least from my perspective, and I think a lot of people, the only universal positive that people seem to have about Marathon was that it had at least an interesting aesthetic, even if it wasn't your cup of tea. Now that it's a stolen aesthetic, what is left? Reports from people around the industry that have an ear over there at Bungie say that morale is at an all-time low at a studio that has been in a little bit of financial dire straits for a while and has had its share of controversies with Destiny 2. But of course that's not all, because we also have reports of very inappropriate behavior within Bungie and the good old boys, or the old guard if you'd prefer, completely ignoring the team of devs on Marathon and their ideas of what would work and what wouldn't, making the entire project a hellscape to work on. To the point where the current direction of Marathon is somewhere between being heavily reworked and kind of making it disappear to reappear it, or just being cancelled. Because at this point, it's starting to feel like it would be Concord all over again, especially considering that it has the same business model of $40 up front plus season passes and microtransactions. But see, there's more to this, because the situation over at Bungie has overshadowed a much more important conversation about PlayStation as a whole. Don't forget that Bungie is a PlayStation studio, because just one day before the Bungie scandal happened, Fair Games, the last remaining live service from PlayStation that hasn't been canceled of their original crop of a dozen live services that they wanted to put out, as announced by them all the way back in 2022, and with a maximum date of somewhere in 2025. Well, the last games standing from that were Fair Games and Marathon. And while Marathon is embroiled in all of this, people seem to have just kind of ignored the fact that Fair Games director and CEO of Haven Studios, the studio that Sony purchased for Fair Games, has quit. That director was Jade Raymond of Ubisoft fame as a producer on many Ubisoft hits that started her own studio for this, and she has resigned after what seems to be the first round of external playtests regarding Fair Games that came back not very positive. And look, I think that we tend to jump to conclusions a lot when it comes to covering news. It's one of the reasons that I take my time to really dig into stuff before just putting out a reactionary video. And that's because coming up I will do my due diligence of explaining why this isn't jumping to conclusions that it doesn't actually sound good for Fair Games, but why on other occasions in the industry we normally wouldn't be alarmed at the CEO leaving. As strange as that sounds. The entirety of this situation is a mess, and yes, it does stop not at Bungie, but at PlayStation. The amount of mistakes that have been made pretty much since 2020 regarding PlayStation, its brand, and the projects that they have invested into are of a size that, if it weren't the console manufacturer that they are, would have tanked any other studio. Any other company would be under if they had done what PlayStation has done in the last 5 years. And it's not that I'm mad that they're getting away with it, that they're actually surviving this catastrophe as a company. It's that for them to survive, the only thing they're doing is taking all of these enormous losses and trying to scrape by and make more money off of the customer, because they have to keep that bottom line green. And in that process, instead of delivering to us fantastic games and using their studios, their proven, incredibly talented studios, to make fantastic games that we want to play, they're investing millions upon hundreds of millions of dollars into live service projects that they have then canceled, have then flopped, and just, it's a mess. And I just honestly find this insane. Because if you think about this from like any other industry in the world, PlayStation went ahead with what we believe is somewhere between 12 or 13 different live service projects, depends on if Marathon is counted in the 12 or not. But we know that 6 of them were canceled, 2 more of those were canceled. The Last of Us's live service multiplayer game was also canceled, and we're not sure if that was included as well. They released a Helldivers 2, which, fair enough, huge success, great game. But also, like, one of the most external projects of all of these, Arrowhead is not a PlayStation studio, it's just that Helldivers is a PlayStation IP. And then the biggest catastrophe, the biggest flop in video game history. And now they have the CEO of the one that was remaining quit, and the other one in an art-stealing scandal that might actually end the studio. If instead of 13 to 14 games with this track record, we were talking about a movie studio, they wouldn't make more movies. They'd be done. If we were talking about a record label, it doesn't matter if you put out the best-selling album of the year if you invested into 13 equally expensive or more expensive albums and they never came out or were the biggest disaster in music history. And the price to pay for those flops, for those mistakes, for those missed investments are passed on to us, the customer, not just directly in paying money for stuff and prices being raised, but in the opportunity cost of what these studios could have been working on instead. And all of this is still really good news. Because whether it's with PlayStation dramatically changing where they're headed and what they want to do, or just from the perspective of other studios out there, other publishers looking at what PlayStation has achieved in the last 5 years and going, you know what, maybe we shouldn't make a live service. Maybe we should just stop trying. That doesn't seem to be going well. Maybe we're not special. Maybe we should just like stick to something else or try and innovate. And that is good. This is a teaching moment. It's an opportunity for everybody to learn from these mistakes and like stop it. But hey, there's still quite a bit to dig into with this story. So, hi, I'm Mug. And if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. I do apologize for my hair today. I can't always look as good as you do because let's be honest, you're looking fantastic as usual. We're going to look at PlayStation's track record, at the decisions that were made and why they were made, why we have ended up where we are, at Bungie's track record, and why they are almost on their way out from what reports claim. And yes, we are going to look at live services as a trend and where the video game industry is headed. Because PlayStation doesn't seem to know how to make games anymore, and Xbox doesn't seem to know how to make consoles. And this entire thing is kind of crazy. So remember, if you like this video at any point, hit the like button. That helps it spread through the YouTube algorithm, keep more people informed of what is hopefully an interesting and balanced perspective, something that actually takes into account nuance. And if you like the way that I cover these things, don't subscribe yet, but as you enjoy the video, keep it in the back of your mind, and if I earn your subscription and you want more of what I do, then you can hit the button. Let's get into it. Okay, we need to start off with just a little bit of housekeeping. People who have been with this channel for a while, this won't be new to them, but the truth is, there's a lot of new people recently. Welcome, by the way. It's awesome that you're here. As I said in the intro, Sony announced in 2022 that their plan had been from the past and was working towards 12 live service releases. If that doesn't sound like, oh, we believe that this is the future of video games, this is where we can make the most money, I don't know what does. And of course, that's the train that they kind of jumped on under the direction of Jim Ryan, pushing for stuff like Concord, which we now know was kind of his baby. He pushed really hard for Concord, believed it was going to be a huge franchise for PlayStation, right? If they ever put out PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale 2, there would be 3 Concord characters in that sucker. And if that sounds strange, the truth is that it isn't. And PlayStation wasn't the only publisher chasing the live service high and trying to hit that gold rush and make the most out of the popularity of them and just how profitable they could be, how much return on investment there was for live service games. Please keep in mind that at no point have we really discussed these games being fun or interesting or innovative. We've discussed how much money they can make because that seems to be, I can't affirm it, but like with the design of a lot of these games, seems to be the priority. It didn't take long for PlayStation to then cancel 6 of the 12. Now, I want to be transparent that some of the numbers here are a little bit weird because we know of other projects like Marathon. We know of stuff like Project Gummy Bears, which is another Bungie project that has now been taken over by PlayStation. We know about The Last of Us Factions, which is the multiplayer version of that. We're not sure if that was in those 12 or was kind of like its own separate thing by Naughty Dog. But we do know 6 were canceled, and then we also know the live service God of War game that was being worked on by Bluepoint. Yes, not a Bloodborne remaster for Bluepoint, not an original IP for Bluepoint, no, a God of War live service game, once again, into the live service dungeons. And Sony Bend, which is of course the people behind Days Gone, and before that, Siphon Filter, 989 Studios became Bend and all of that, were also working on an unannounced live service game that was also canceled. These studios and the other 6 that we never really heard of, but we've heard rumors of what they could have been, were in production. They were in development. They were designed. They were greenlit. People spent months, maybe even years of their lives working on these projects. Money was spent on them for them to disappear. And the only thing that PlayStation had to show for it at the end of the day was Helldivers 2, banger, great game, still gonna say it, proves that if you make smart decisions around the live service and actually find an interesting game, an interesting niche to present to people that is unique and exciting, you can still make a live service work. It's just that that's not what most people do. What most people do is believe the hype that this is just some magic trend that'll make you money. And of course, Concord, which, you know, we know about Concord. As the cancellations kept rolling in, we only had 2 left, Marathon and Fair Games. And again, as I mentioned in the intro, Fair Games, Jade Raymond's new studio baby project comes, big ol' Sony says, hey, we want this. This is gonna be really good. This is gonna fit in with our live service portfolio, oh so great. Years go by, no info on the game besides a pre-rendered CGI trailer that really painted it as like a generic Watch Dogs 2 version of a game that's mixed with Hood, Outlaws, and Legends, and then, hey, she just quits. Now, I did say that there was some clarification to be had on this. And that's because having a CEO or a responsible creative for a game, especially more on the design side, more on the visionary side of a game, having them leave a team or even leave a company at a point before the game is out is not necessarily a bad omen. It's not an indication that the quality of the game is, or that there's internal turmoil or struggles or, you know, conflicts between maybe Haven Studios and PlayStation after seeing something like Concord. It doesn't have to indicate any of that. It's pretty common for those sorts of positions, maybe not CEO of your own studio, but could be, especially since when Jade Raymond made the studio, it wasn't a PlayStation studio. So maybe she just wanted to finish this and just go start somewhere else and not be under PlayStation anymore. But the point is, if your job is done, it's pretty normal for you to walk away. And it's really on a case-by-case basis. We've seen this plenty of times with games that came out excellent. It's just the nature of moving on to the next project. But this doesn't feel like that at all. The overall track record of PlayStation with live services leaves a lot to be desired. The fact that we never even got to see any gameplay of Fair Games, despite it being announced so long ago, a very different strategy than what PlayStation did with both Concord and Helldivers. Helldivers being introduced basically right off the bat with gameplay, and Concord being revealed and then being playable just months later. Fair Games just kind of being announced and existing and then never showing up again, and then suddenly hearing rumblings of its external playtests having very negative feedback, very much in line with something like Marathon, and then Jade Raymond quitting her own company. Doesn't sound like Fair Games is gonna be a hit. I'm very sorry to say that even when examining the whole context, I'm not even sure it's coming out. Let's put it that way. And the reason all of this is just wild, like that's the only word that I can honestly use, is because what has been PlayStation's first party output in the last 5 years since they started chasing the live service money train? Think about it. What, we got a Ratchet & Clank game, we got a Spider-Man game, right? God of War Ragnarok came out, but that was in production from way before this new direction of PlayStation. Most of the big, interesting PlayStation heavy hitters have been exclusives that they've bought. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Stellar Blade, a lot of the stuff that's coming out from like PlayStation China Hero, projects like Lost Souls Aside, which is coming up, Phantom Blade Zero, the upcoming Death Stranding 2. These aren't PlayStation games per se. They're games that people are making and PlayStation are reaching agreements with them. the prestige of first-party PlayStation games isn't about them paying other people to put exclusives on their console, just to have the people they paid say, we're never doing this again because we underperformed so terribly that even the amount of money that you paid us for these exclusives doesn't actually cover the loss of releasing exclusively on PS5, as Square Enix has said and shifted their plan. It is absolutely bananas. And yet, despite not just making a really bad decision on what the direction of PlayStation and its studios should be, despite making that decision in an all-in of just, we're gonna make as many of them as possible, make everybody start working on a live service yesterday, and seeing it all collapse, PlayStation is not actually suffering. But that does beg the question, what is the future of PlayStation? What are they going to do from here? But we'll talk about that a bit more in Chapter 3. But now, we really need to talk about Bungie. Look, I don't think it's surprising to anybody that Bungie has not been in the best position. For as much as the studio is filled with developers that can make some of the best shooting mechanics ever, Destiny is just another game in the live service machine that has suffered the consequences of the live service system becoming more and more difficult. A notoriously difficult game to get into late. If you wanted to just start playing Destiny now, it's overwhelming to hell and back. If you wanted to get invested into it, it's a pretty big investment that they're asking of you. For a fan base that consistently complains, from what I perceive to be very legitimate complaints, about what Bungie puts out, and through all of that has seen its overall value, the actual revenue that they generate, go down and down and down to the point that a lot of their future projects are in question. And Marathon was meant to be their saving grace. Hey, Bungie's making more than one game. Let's see what they can pull off with Marathon, which, yeah, same name as the old Marathon, but completely new thing. And the timeline goes pretty simple. Marathon is announced. People think it looks visually very striking, curious. Let's see if Bungie can be the one to kind of close the gap between the hardcore extraction shooter lovers and something more accessible to everybody with the gunplay we've come to expect from them. That sounds like potentially a breakout hit, even if still a risky gambit. And so Marathon trucked along. People would hype it up, be hopeful for it, and then people actually got to play it for alpha playtests and have opinions on it, and those opinions were not very positive. Fundamental design problems and pacing issues and just decisions that didn't gel well with neither fans of extraction shooters nor people who were looking for this to be the game that got them into those. Not looking good at all, except for the game itself. For a lot of people, it looked really good, and I think that even for the people who don't like the aesthetic, you had to admit, it's pretty different. It's very striking. It definitely isn't the rest of the games we see. But in what felt like just the worst possible situation, the negative feedback surrounding Marathon came out as there was a lot of positive feedback coming out surrounding Arc Raiders. Now, I'll have more to say about Arc Raiders at some point in the future, because I also have thoughts. That'll come in a different video. But the comparisons were not favorable for Marathon. But hey, it still looked cool. And then it just turns out that the one thing people liked about it, the looking cool part, they actually didn't do that. They just stole it. Now, let me be clear, at least from what can be my perspective. The controversy surrounding Marathon and its art is the thing that's killed the game, and there's no one here to blame except Bungie themselves. Many of the problems regarding its gameplay were things that, with an accurate delay and, some foresight and actually doing the best they could have been salvaged and could have led to a fantastic game that would at least break even or even be successful. And what's more important to me, a game that maybe a lot of people would really enjoy, which is kind of the whole point of playing games. It would have been a tough road, but it's definitely a road that they could have followed. But the stolen art has left such a sour taste around everything with Marathon. It what seems to be just a month of horrible news for the game, that it's very difficult to imagine it being perceived positively. And I do want to take just a moment and say that I feel for the developers at Bungie that have been pursuing this project with passion and have seen it all crumble. For as much as there might be bad design decisions and, of course, art theft involved in this project, A lot of the people working on it put their blood, sweat, and tears into it for years, believing that they wanted to do something unique, something that would change the industry, something that would really resonate with players, and they just grinded day in and day out to make a fantastic game, just for many of them to have it all be destroyed by things outside of their control. When we pair that with a lot of the recent reports we've seen, including an ex-Bungie dev talking about how working on Marathon was just extremely humiliating and a toxic work environment, with the people at the top needing to be gutted, when we look at other signs of some of the things happening at Bungie, including the 220 layoffs they had last year, with their leadership saying that taking pay cuts to preserve job positions was not something that was in the company's DNA, that's not the sort of studio they are, it paints a very bad picture for what is actually happening to them and what could be coming up for them. Especially when a lot of those devs were precisely warning of the issues that when people put their hands on Marathon, they found them to be issues and were the ones pushing for the game to have a more active PvE component, as a lot of people have asked for. And of course, hubris always wins in these circles of the industry, and they were promptly ignored. And I do want to extend my empathy to the people that just got blindsided by these things and are now just heartbroken. Reports say that morale at Bungie is at an all-time low, and yes, there are things that are directly their responsibility and people who know who they are over there for letting oversights of former employees leaving stolen art inside of their official assets and never checking that. But like in all of these situations, these companies are huge and there's a lot of very innocent, hardworking people caught in the crossfire. My heart goes out to all of you. We deserve a world with fantastic games to play, and the people that make those fantastic games should be in fantastic conditions. I say this to anybody being directly affected by the news of this. Keep your head up and don't lose your passion, because we, the customer, the gamers, are anxious to play what you have bubbling in your mind. And with that out of the way, holy shit! Okay, so it's not just the fact that they stole art from this artist, Anti-Real. That's not the end of the story, and there is more nuance here to be explored. Once again, look, it is fair to say that Joseph Cross, which is the visual design director on Marathon, has artwork dating back 10, 11 years that very clearly shows his inclination for this art style. It would be very unfair to say that all of Marathon was copied from other artists, just creatively reinterpreted and remixed in order to create its visual identity, because the person responsible for its visual identity has been in that scene and in that style for a very long time. But it is also undeniable that a lot of the more concrete visual identity, you know, in the way that kind of happens when you just steal stuff, feels like it wasn't made by Bungie. Now, it definitely feels like it was kind of made by some really cool independent artists exploring a specific visual style, of which, sure, Anti-Real is the one that's come out now, but the problem with this is that now we have this doubt in our heads of just how much stolen stuff is still in the game from how many different artists in this scene. How much of meetings that were Joseph Cross telling the art team, hey, this is the mood we're going for. You can look at some of my previous art, but you can also look at like these 3 or 4 artists that I think would be huge to have like up on a mood board or something and kind of draw inspiration from. And that inspiration turned to not just copying, just outright theft. And if you consider that, how much of Marathon's striking visual style, its biggest signature, is just not theirs? How much of Marathon as an identity is now tarnished forever? Because to me, personally, I wanted Marathon to be the thing that got me fully into extraction shooters, a genre that I've tried and tried to get into because I want to experience the highs and the happiness that so many people seem to claim that it offered. And it's just never really clicked with me. And I thought maybe Marathon will be the one, and especially because it looks really cool to me. I like how it looks, and guess what? I don't want to see that look again. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I don't think it's any surprise if you've ever watched the video on this channel that I think that I can't look at Marathon anymore and not be like, huh, they stole everything, cool. And it's just gonna be impossible, actually impossible, to convince people that is not the case. And if you, like me, at any point enjoyed the art style of Marathon, down in the description below, you can head down there and go and follow Anti-Real on different social networks. Follow them, give them support, credit the creators and all that. And oh boy, let me tell you, I'm not gonna get into it, but this is before we even get into the world of just feeding a bunch of different artists with a style to an AI and just taking what they spit out as the basis for a video game, because you better bet your bottom dollar that's coming. When you have the gigantic teams working on Call of Duty saying that they need to use AI to keep their marketplace of overpriced guns full, you really think that other places are gonna start using it? Not stories of people who don't have budgets but want to make their dreams come true. No, gigantic studios that just want to cut corners and end up using AI. The genuine rumblings that are happening is that if Marathon isn't completely transformed to some degree and disappears for a while, which is still a huge financial hit for PlayStation and Bungie, it might just be gone at this point. And once again, I need to ask the question, in what other industry would a company screwing up this hard would just be let go? So I think the image is clear. Let's get the rest of this done with. What is happening, what should happen, and what I think will happen. What's happening is that PlayStation has just lost years of development time, of millions of dollars on projects that have not succeeded, chasing a trend that nobody asked them to. They showed up late to the party, walked straight up to the roulette table, and bet everything they had on blue. And because their number one responsibility is to keep shareholders happy and make sure that they still make money, those costs, those losses are going to be passed on to us, are going to be passed on to the customer in a world where the competition is either disappearing or becoming PCs, which are not really that much of an analogous competition when you think about it, because Xbox is kind of piecing out of the console market to a certain degree, seems to just want to make games. And I honestly think that at this point, if PlayStation doesn't see major changes in leadership, just like 180 the ship as quickly as they can, they should probably stick to just making consoles, man. Because like I don't see how investing this poorly into so many things is good for business, because at this point it would have been much better if they had done nothing. Yes, even with the major success of Helldivers 2, don't underestimate the expenses of development for all of these games. And in my opinion, that is what should happen. PlayStation needs to turn this ship around immediately when it comes to games. There is a legitimate business concern here that their business is not performing up to the standards that you would expect. Because if they hadn't misinvested everything, they would be reporting better results. But I don't really care about that. I care about video games, and I care about what we get to play. And this is just sad. And it's sad that we don't talk about it more. It's sad that we're like, man, Bungie, that they really screwed up. Yeah, sure. But like, can we talk about the bigger picture for just like a moment? Because like, it's bad, man. And more important than that, pretty much every other studio and publisher under the sun should look at the things that Sony have done and say, hey, maybe we should just not do that. Maybe don't do that. Maybe stop. Maybe don't. That's my advice. Okay, that's my advice to you guys. Maybe don't. But unfortunately, what do I think is going to happen and what we need to be aware of? Switch 2 is going to come out, do pretty okay. It might struggle compared to the Switch 1, given that there's plenty of market research to indicate that it will not do as well as the Switch 1 when it released, due to the differences between inflation and wages and just price points and a lot of things and who they're targeting. But they are going to try and normalize higher prices for video games and consoles, and Sony is definitely going to try and take advantage of that in one way or another, given that all of their live services failed. You can bet that if anybody's going to try and start selling games for $90 to recoup the losses that they incurred upon themselves, it would be PlayStation. And they will do their best to try and keep up, not with innovation, not with smart ways of creating projects that people want to play and are also economically sustainable. No. They'll try to keep up with pricing trends in order to keep up with what shareholders demand. Xbox, in their position of slightly infinite money and power, but also kind of, trying to find their way are going to still keep pushing those game prices up, but mostly to convince people that they should subscribe to Game Pass, and you should definitely subscribe to Game Pass on PlayStation in the coming future, which still means that PlayStation is a viable console. That means that Sony's overall business will stay the same. And it's a pretty dire scene to say that for now, but what I can tell you, looking at finances, looking at the earnings reports for PlayStation for so much time, they can't do this again. They can't bet like this again and miss, because it will not survive. It will not be okay. It's not just Concord. Now it's kind of everything. Helldivers 2 isn't enough to save all of this, for as much as I love that game. It's that simple. Because when we're talking about the lives of people and salaries and investors and all of this stuff, it's not a game. But what it is a disaster. That is undeniable. I still think that it's overall a great learning lesson for the industry as a whole. And I think that we should put more emphasis on just how many terrible mistakes PlayStation has made and like study them in the sense of like learn from past mistakes. Doesn't have to be your own. Learn from others' mistakes. Better test the waters. Better understand your customers. Better understand where the trends are heading in a market. And maybe even try and create the trends yourself instead of just following them. And I think all of those things would lead to better video games for us to play. But that is the state of not just Bungie, but PlayStation right now. What'll happen? Great questions. I don't think anybody can know with certainty. The most we can do is educated guesses, but you can bet that I'll be here to give you my opinion on it and hopefully entertain you along the way. So, I've been Mug. Thank you so much for watching, and a very special thanks to the members of The Wall, be they over on Patreon or here on YouTube as members. These are the people that directly support me, and if you would like to do so as well, links in the description down below. I thank you so much for your support. Go out there, enjoy some great video games, because it doesn't matter how much of this news is going on, there's tons of great video games to talk about, and I'll be talking about a lot of them in this actual week. So remember that maybe I earned your subscription, and you can check those out too. And as always, I'll see you again very soon.